The morning felt almost unreal, like the world had conspired to make everything perfect. The sun was soft and golden, pouring through the chapel windows like honey. I could hear the flower girls giggling, dropping petals too early and laughing as they ran barefoot across the stone path. Guests were arriving, dressed in joy. The garden smelled like roses and expensive perfume, and for a moment, it was everything a mother could dream of. I stood in the corner of the bridal suite pretending to check my phone, but really, I was watching Isabel in the mirror. My daughter. My heart outside my body. She looked breathtaking, elegant, glowing, so full of hope. I smiled when she caught my eye, and she smiled back, but I had to look away. There were tears forming, not just of pride. No, this was something heavier, something I had carried for far too long. Today was her wedding day. But in a strange way, it was mine too. My moment. Not to make a scene, but to finally make peace. I'd waited so many years for this day, not just to see Isabel walk down the aisle, but to finally exhale, to finally stop pretending. And yet, here I was, zipping her dress, fastening her bracelet, the one Michael gave me years ago when I still believed he was the man I married. People kept coming up to me, hugging me, saying things like, "You must be so proud," or, "You look radiant, Laura." And I nodded, smiled, thanked them all, gracious, polished, exactly who they expected me to be. No one saw the way my hands trembled slightly when I reached for a glass of water. No one noticed how tightly I held my clutch, as if it were the only thing keeping me grounded in that room full of laughter and lace. Michael walked in briefly to check on Isabel. Of course, everyone greeted him like he was the hero of the hour. Charming, composed, so effortlessly admired. And I stood there beside him, the perfect picture of an enduring marriage. I even laughed when he told one of his usual dad jokes, the ones that always made Isabel roll her eyes. But inside? Inside, I felt the cold grip of memory tightening around my spine. Because 20 years ago, I stood in front of a mirror too, swollen with pregnancy, heart cracked open, while Michael whispered apologies into a silence he'd created. He broke me then, and I never told anyone. I never ruined his image. I held it all in. For Isabel, for appearances. But watching her today, so beautiful, so unaware of the storm that shaped our lives, it reminded me exactly why I came here with more than just a smile. I kept glancing at the time, not because anything was running late, but because I could feel it coming. The shift. The moment I had been rehearsing in my head for years. And yet, I wasn't nervous. Oddly enough, I felt calm. There's a strange kind of peace in knowing your truth has waited long enough. It doesn't scream anymore. It just waits to be heard. And today, I had no intention of silencing it. Isabel turned to me just before the ceremony, eyes wide with excitement, hands trembling slightly as she held her bouquet. "Do I look okay, Mom?" she asked. And I nearly lost it, because she looked more than okay. She looked like everything I had ever fought for. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "You look like the best part of my life." And I meant it with every cell in my body. That moment will stay with me forever. As the music began and everyone stood for the bride, I stepped back and let the world focus on her. All eyes on Isabel. Just as they should be. But inside me, something had quietly shifted. Today wasn't just about love and promises. Not for me. It was about a different kind of vow. One I made long ago. One I never said out loud, but never took back either. It happened during the 3rd trimester. I remember because I had just painted the nursery walls a soft green, hoping it would calm the baby. I was waddling around with swollen ankles and a back that felt like it had given up on me. I should have been resting, but instead I was doing laundry when I found the first clue. A receipt, crumpled inside his jacket pocket from a hotel not far from his office. At first, I thought it must have been a business thing. I wanted to believe that. But then came the voicemail. Her voice, smooth, rehearsed, too comfortable with him. She called him babe, thanked him for the necklace. I remember standing there in the kitchen, holding my belly with one hand and the phone with the other, feeling my whole world collapse in complete silence. That kind of betrayal? It doesn't come with screaming. It comes with stillness. Cold, sharp, paralyzing stillness. I never told anyone. Not my mother, not my sister, not my best friend. I buried it. I smiled through baby showers and family dinners. I let Michael hold my hand during labor. And the entire time, he thought I didn't know. But I did. I knew everything. I kept the emails, the letters, the photos she sent him. I even kept the voicemail, every detail. I held on to it like armor, like proof that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined the hollowness he left behind. When she left him, yes, she ended it, not him, Michael came crawling back like a man freshly baptized in guilt. He wept. He begged. He wrapped himself in shame like it could undo what he'd done. And I stood there, holding our newborn daughter in my arms. And I listened. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just looked at him and realized how little I truly knew the man I'd married. How little he deserved the family I built around him. He said it was a mistake, that it meant nothing, that it would never happen again. And maybe he believed that. Maybe he thought words could stitch up what he'd torn. I stayed. Not because I forgave him. I didn't. Not because I forgot. I never did. I stayed for Isabel. For the version of her childhood that didn't include custody arrangements and weekend visits. For the birthday parties, the school plays, the Christmas mornings. I gave her stability, even if it cost me my own. But in the back of my mind, I made a promise. A quiet, dangerous vow. That one day he would know what it felt like. To have something beautiful, something sacred, ruined by the very person who was supposed to protect it. I didn't know when, I didn't know how, but I knew it would come. Some truths don't die in silence. They wait. And mine had been waiting for 20 years. There were days when I almost convinced myself to let it go. Days when Michael would make Isabel laugh so hard she'd fall off the couch, or when he'd kiss me on the cheek before dinner like nothing had ever happened. And I'd think, maybe this is enough. Maybe I can live with the lie, as long as it keeps her world intact. But then I'd open that old wooden box at the back of my closet. And there it was. The printed emails, the photos, the voicemail burned onto a CD. My reality, my fuel. I became an expert at pretending. The supportive wife at office parties, the one who laughed at his stories, toasted his promotions, stood beside him in Christmas cards. Everyone thought we were solid, strong, unshakable. What a cruel kind of talent. To perform love in front of an audience that had no idea they were watching a play. I perfected it. But the truth? It never left me. It lived beneath my ribs, quiet and constant, like a second heartbeat. And over the years, I watched Michael build his reputation. He became the man people admired, dependable, successful, the family man. I watched him accept praise for being a husband he never truly was. And each time I tucked away the anger, the ache, the betrayal, saving it. Not out of bitterness, out of purpose. Because I knew the day would come when the mask would fall, and I wouldn't have to lift a single finger to tear it off. I'd only have to open my mouth. Weddings have a way of pulling people into a dream. That day, I let myself drift with them, floating from table to table, kissing cheeks, clinking glasses, smiling for photos. Everyone kept saying how happy I looked, how radiant. And I suppose I was. But not for the reasons they thought. This wasn't just joy. It was release. It was the weight lifting, moment by moment, as I got closer to what I came here to do. I made sure Isabel's day stayed untouched. She deserved that. Every moment of it. The beauty, the magic, the love, all hers. I laughed with her bridesmaids, danced with my cousins, threw my head back during the toast to the couple. I didn't fake a single second. I meant it. Because none of this was about revenge against her. I would never let the truth become her punishment. No, this was something else, something far more precise. Michael watched me a few times from across the room. I caught the way his eyes lingered, slightly puzzled, maybe even a little hopeful. He must have thought I'd finally let it go. All of it. That this was some unspoken truce, sealed with white wine and polite smiles. Poor man. He never could read me as well as he thought, and today, that would become painfully clear. As the evening wore on, the lights softened and the music slowed. People were settling into their seats again, waiting for the speeches. Isabel leaned her head on her new husband's shoulder, glowing in that effortless way only a bride can. I stood near the back of the room, hands folded calmly, my heart steady. This was the part of the night everyone had been waiting for, when the father of the bride would raise his glass and charm the room with a few sentimental lines. They called his name. Michael stood up, straightening his jacket with that same practiced confidence he always wore like a second skin. I watched the corners of his mouth curl, his hand brushing Isabel's shoulder as he made his way to the mic. He didn't see me moving. Not at first. Not until I reached the edge of the dance floor, lifted my hand slightly and said, clearly, gently, "Before we hear from the man of the hour, I'd like to say a few words." The room fell into a hush. Conversations cut mid-sentence. A few guests chuckled awkwardly, expecting a cute motherly moment, maybe a joke or a blessing. Michael paused, unsure, but he stepped aside. He had to. And as I stepped forward, I felt nothing but clarity. I didn't need notes. I didn't need permission. I only needed my voice. And after 2 decades, it had never been steadier. I looked out at the sea of faces, family, friends, people who had watched our lives from the outside and believed they knew our story. I gave them a warm smile, the kind that disarms people before the truth hits. Then I turned my eyes to Isabel, her bouquet resting in her lap, her smile still sweet, still unaware. That was the hardest part, knowing I was about to shift her world. But I also knew I wasn't shattering it. I was setting it free. I began softly, the way mothers do when they speak from the heart. I talked about Isabel, her strength, her kindness, the way she always saw the best in people. I spoke of motherhood, of love, of the promises we make and the weight they carry. And then, slowly, my voice changed. Not louder, just deeper, calmer, as if the truth had waited patiently for its turn, and now, it had the floor. "There's something about vows," I said. "When they're broken, they don't just vanish. Sometimes they wait." I didn't look at Michael. I didn't have to. I could feel him stiffen, his breath catching. I reached into my clutch and wrapped my fingers around the envelope I had sealed the night before. The room, once full of champagne and music, now held something else entirely. Silence. And in that silence, I took the first step toward the altar of truth. My hands didn't shake, not even a little. I unfolded the envelope slowly, letting the paper breathe as if it had been holding its own kind of tension all these years. People leaned forward in their seats, some smiling politely, others shifting uneasily. Michael took a step toward me, whispering something under his breath. I didn't even hear it. I didn't need to. I raised my hand gently and said without turning, "Not now." He froze. I looked at Isabel. Her brows had drawn together, just slightly. Still calm. Still open. I had to begin with her. "Isabel," I said, "you are the strongest woman I know, not because of what you've done, but because of who you've always been. You lead with your heart, even when others don't deserve it. That is your power." I could feel her holding her breath now. She knew something was coming, but not what. Not yet. Then I turned to the crowd, holding the envelope delicately in my hand like it was something sacred. We talk a lot about love at weddings. About promises, vows, and forever. But we rarely talk about what happens when those vows are broken, when the truth gets buried under time and appearances. Tonight, I want to show you something. Not to cause pain, but to release it. Because some truths deserve to walk in the light. I reached into the envelope and pulled out the first page. A printed email, dated exactly 2 months before Isabel was born. I held it up, but I didn't need to read it aloud. I wanted them to see it. His name. Her name. The subject line that read, "Last night was perfect." A ripple moved through the room. Someone gasped quietly. Another shifted in their chair. But I stayed steady, eyes on the truth, not the noise. Then came the photos. Just a few, carefully chosen. Smiling faces in hotel bars. A selfie in his office. The same one where he used to take conference calls while I napped, swollen and exhausted with our unborn child. I didn't wave them around or point fingers. I let the images speak, each one a quiet hammer tapping at the porcelain mask Michael had worn for decades. I could feel the weight of eyes shifting toward him. And still, I didn't look at him once. Michael stepped forward, his voice low, urgent. "Laura, don't do this." But I turned to him finally and met his eyes with something stronger than rage. It was peace. The kind that comes after years of carrying someone else's secret. I said it clearly, not loud, just enough for everyone to hear. "You gave me pain on the day our daughter was born. I give you truth on the day she becomes a wife." And then I stepped back. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. It was as if the entire room had been dipped in glass. Fragile, frozen, full of reflection. I looked at Isabel again. Her face had gone pale, her fingers curled around the edge of her chair. She wasn't crying, not yet. But her eyes were searching. Not for the truth. She had just received that. She was searching for her foundation, and realizing it wasn't what she thought. Michael stood frozen, somewhere between shame and panic. His hands clenched at his sides like a man trying to hold on to something that had already slipped through. I didn't flinch. I didn't need to say more. I had said what mattered. After all these years, I hadn't raised my voice or thrown anything. I had simply peeled the mask off, slowly, gently, and let him meet the man underneath it. Not in private, not in secrecy, but in front of everyone who once applauded him. And with that, I turned to the crowd and nodded politely. "Thank you," I said, as if I'd just delivered a toast. I walked away from the microphone, past the stunned faces and clutched pearls, past Michael, whose eyes followed me like he was watching his own legend crumble. I walked straight to Isabel and took her hands. She didn't pull away. She just held on, and I held her back. The rest, I knew, would unfold on its own. I didn't stay for the questions, or the apologies, or the whispers that grew louder as the shock settled into curiosity. I kissed Isabel's forehead, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear like I had done 1,000 times since she was a baby, and I said softly, "Now you're free. And so am I." Then I stepped away from the noise and into the night air. It was cooler than before, a breeze finally breaking through the weight of the day. Michael was gone before the cake had even been cut. Not by choice. Isabel asked someone, quietly, firmly, to escort him out. No scene, no shouting. just the quiet unraveling of a man who had built his comfort on someone else's silence. I imagine he never thought it would come to this, that I would ever say it out loud. But the thing about secrets is, they don't stay buried. Not when the person holding them finally decides to breathe. The party carried on, a little quieter, a little more aware. Some people left early, others stayed and danced, trying to reclaim the night. I don't blame them. Life doesn't stop for the truth. It makes space for it. I watched Isabel from a distance once more. Her smile wasn't the same. It was smaller, tighter, but it was real. She knew now. She saw. And strangely, I think part of her felt relieved too, like a fog had lifted. In the days that followed, the story spread faster than I ever could have imagined. Some people called me brave. Others whispered that I was cruel. But no one, not one person, ignored it. That was never the goal anyway. I didn't do it for applause or revenge. I did it because silence was starting to rot me from the inside. And because the version of love we pretend into existence doesn't protect anyone, it only delays the fallout. Michael tried to explain himself, of course. Reached out to mutual friends, even made a post online about forgiveness and personal growth. It read like a man trying to outrun a shadow he'd finally seen in daylight. But words don't weigh the same when truth has already taken the stage. People listened, politely. Then they looked away. Because deep down they knew. The damage was never in the confession. It was in the years it was withheld. As for me, I didn't answer the calls. I didn't check the comments. I booked a train ticket. I packed light, just a small suitcase, a pair of worn sandals, and my passport. For the first time in years, I looked at myself in the mirror and saw someone becoming again. Not surviving, not pretending, just becoming. And that feeling, it was worth every second of the 20 years it took to get here. I traveled for weeks. No real plan, just a list of places I'd once circled in guidebooks and told myself I'd visit someday. I drank coffee by the sea in a quiet village where no one knew my name. I read entire novels without checking my phone. I let the days stretch, slow and soft, and learned the sound of my own thoughts without anyone else's voice layered over them. And for the first time in 2 decades, I laughed without thinking about who was watching. Isabel and I spoke often. Our conversations were different now, more open, more grown. She told me she was proud of me. That she was grieving in her own way, not just for the truth, but for the version of her father she had to let go of. I told her that was okay. That we could love someone and still admit they hurt us. That we could move forward without dragging the weight of what they did behind us. And she understood. She really did. Now, when people ask me if I regret doing it, speaking the truth, breaking the illusion, I smile. Because I know the cost of silence. I lived it. I wore it like a second skin for 20 years. And I also know the power of saying what needs to be said. Some vows are broken in secret. Others? They're broken out loud, so they echo forever.
My sister announced she made senior partner at our family's law firm. And what about you, Emma? My aunt asked with pity. Still running that little coffee shop? They had no idea that tomorrow I'd be signing papers making me the owner of half the city's downtown. I can still hear the clinking of glasses and forced laughter from that Thanksgiving dinner. The crystal chandelier in my parents' dining room cast shadows across faces that hadn't bothered to visit my cafe in over 3 years despite it being just 4 blocks away from the family's law firm. Emma, my sister Sophia's voice cut through the polite dinner conversation. Tell everyone your big news. I looked up from my plate, already knowing what was coming. Sophia sat there in her designer suit, diamond engagement ring catching the light as she reached for her wine glass. She had that look, the one that said she was about to remind everyone why she was the family's crown jewel. I made senior partner, she announced, her smile dazzling, youngest in the firm's history. The table erupted in excitement. Mom practically glowed with pride. Dad raised his glass in a toast to Sophia Harrison, carrying on the Harrison and Associates legacy. I took a small sip of my wine, thinking about the stack of contracts waiting on my desk at home, but of course, nobody here knew about those. To them, I was just the family disappointment who played cafe owner instead of joining the prestigious family law firm. "And what about you, Emma?" Aunt Patricia turned to me with that familiar mix of pity and condescension. "Still running that little coffee shop, the Wild Vine Cafe?" I corrected her quietly. "Yes, I am still serving coffee." Sophia laughed, sharing a knowing look with our cousin Diana. "You know, there's always a place for you at the firm if you want a real career." I stirred my mashed potatoes, remembering the meeting I'd had that morning with one of the city's biggest real estate developers. The contract I'd signed was worth more than Sophia's entire year's salary, but they didn't need to know that. "Not yet. The cafe does well enough," I said mildly. "Well enough to pay rent, I hope," Mom chimed in, concern etched on her face. "That downtown location must be expensive." I almost smiled. If they only knew I owned the entire building and the one next to it and most of that block. "I manage," I replied. Sophia launched into a story about her latest big case, some corporate merger worth millions. Our parents hung on every word just like they had since we were kids. Sophia, the straight-A student who followed the perfect path, elite law school, prestigious clerkship, then straight into the family firm. And me? I was the rebel who chose culinary school over law school, who used my trust fund to buy a rundown cafe instead of a luxury condo. "I just wrapped up the Anderson acquisition," Sophia was saying. "You should have seen their legal team scrambling when I found the loophole in their contract. Mr. Chen was so impressed. He's bringing all of his business to our firm now." I kept my face carefully neutral at the mention of James Chen. If Sophia only knew who really controlled most of his real estate holdings. "I just don't understand," Mom said later, cornering me in the kitchen as I helped with dishes. "You're smart, Emma. You could have had everything Sophie has. Why waste your life serving coffee?" I dried a crystal wine glass, thinking about my morning schedule for tomorrow. "Not everyone wants to be a lawyer, Mom, but you're capable of so much more." She lowered her voice. "Look at your sister. Designer clothes, luxury car, that gorgeous penthouse apartment. Don't you want that kind of success?" I thought about my own penthouse, the one I bought last month under one of my holding companies, the one with a better view than Sophia's. "I'm happy with my choices," I said simply. Mom shook her head. "I just worry about your future. The cafe business is so unstable. What happens when you want to start a family? How will you provide?" I bit back a laugh, thinking about my diverse investment portfolio and the string of properties I quietly acquired over the past 5 years. The cafe had just been the beginning, my front door into the world of downtown real estate. Later that night, as everyone gathered their coats to leave, Sophia cornered me by the door. "Hey, I meant what I said about the firm," she said, her voice carrying that elder sister authority she'd perfected since childhood. "Dad would create a position for you in a heartbeat. You could start in corporate law, maybe work your way up." "Thanks," I cut her off, "but I'm good where I am." She frowned, perfectly plucked eyebrows drawing together. "Emma, be serious. You can't serve lattes forever. Don't you want to make something of yourself?" Oh, if she only knew, I had made something of myself. All right, something much bigger than anyone in this family suspected. Tomorrow morning would prove that. "I should go," I said, checking my watch. "Early morning at the cafe, right?" Sophia smirked. "Those coffee beans will grind themselves." I drove home to my real office, hidden in plain sight above the cafe. While my family thought I spent my days steaming milk and making change, I built an empire of my own. The cafe was just the public face, the piece of me they could see and mock. Behind it lay a web of real estate holdings, strategic investments, and carefully crafted contracts that would soon reshape downtown. Unlocking my office, I settled behind my desk and opened the file marked Chen Acquisitions. Tomorrow morning, James Chen would walk into my cafe, not as Sophia's client, but as my business partner. He'd been helping me buy up properties through various shell companies for years, keeping my identity hidden even from his own lawyers, including my sister. I pulled out the final contract, the one that would consolidate all my downtown holdings under a single management company, the one that would finally reveal who really controlled half of the city's most valuable real estate. My phone buzzed. A text from Sophia. "Dinner was fun, though. Mr. Chen mentioned he might stop by your cafe tomorrow. Try not to embarrass me. He's our biggest client." I smiled, setting my phone aside without replying. Tomorrow would certainly be interesting. The contract was straightforward. My various holding companies would merge into a single entity, Harrison Capital Group. The name was a bit of family irony I couldn't resist. As I reviewed the paperwork one last time, I thought about my sister's smug smile at dinner, my mother's concerned lectures, my father's dismissive attitude toward my little coffee shop. They had no idea that while they were focused on law firm politics and courtroom drama, I'd been quietly building something far bigger. 5 years of careful planning, strategic acquisitions, and hidden ownership were about to pay off. Tomorrow, James Chen would sign the final papers, and my family would learn that the daughter they'd written off as a simple barista actually owned more of downtown than their precious law firm could ever dream of handling. The morning after Thanksgiving, I arrived at the Wild Vine Cafe earlier than usual. My manager, Kate, was already there setting up for what she thought would be a normal day. "The special meeting room is ready," she said, handing me a coffee, "though I still don't understand why Mr. Chen wants to meet in a cafe instead of his office." I smiled, taking a sip. Sometimes the best deals happen in unexpected places. At precisely 9 a.m., James Chen walked through the door. Despite being one of the city's most powerful real estate developers, he dressed simply in a black sweater and slacks. That was one thing I'd always appreciated about him. No pretense, just business. "Good morning, Miss Harrison," he said warmly, then loudly enough for others to hear. "Could I get a vanilla latte?" I played along, heading behind the counter to make his drink personally. We'd perfected this routine over the years. Me, the humble cafe owner, him, the casual customer. Nobody ever suspected we were orchestrating million-dollar deals over coffee. As I steamed the milk, the cafe's door chimed again. I looked up to see Sophia striding in, legal briefcase in hand. "Mr. Chen," she called out, clearly surprised to actually find him here. "I didn't expect to see you so early." James accepted his latte from me with a nod. "Ah, Miss Harrison, your sister makes the best vanilla latte in the city. Would you care to join our meeting?" Sophia blinked, glancing between us. "Meeting? Yes, regarding the downtown development project." He gestured to the private room at the back of the cafe. "Shall we?" I could see Sophia's mind racing, probably wondering why her biggest client was having a meeting in her sister's little coffee shop. Still, she followed us into the room, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors. The room looked deceptively simple: comfortable chairs, a solid wooden table, warm lighting. Only the small camera in a corner ready to record the signing hinted at something more significant. "I'll need another witness," James said, pulling out a thick contract. "Perhaps your sister could join us." Sophia's perfect composure slipped slightly. "Emma? Oh, no, she runs the cafe. She doesn't need to be involved in legal matters." James raised an eyebrow. "On the contrary, she's quite essential to this meeting." I sat down at the head of the table, enjoying the growing confusion on my sister's face. "Actually, Sophia, you're the one who doesn't need to be here, but since you are, you might as well witness something interesting." The door opened again and my father walked in, followed by 2 other partners from Harrison and Associates. They must have been meeting nearby and seen Sophia enter. "What's going on here?" Dad demanded. "Sophia, why are you meeting with Mr. Chen in a cafe?" Before she could answer, James spoke up. "Actually, I invited everyone here. It seemed fitting to sign these papers where it all began." "Where what began?" Sophie asked. I opened my laptop, pulling up the presentation I'd prepared. The consolidation of Harrison Capital Group's downtown holdings, currently valued at just over $300 million. The room went silent. Dad's face paled as he looked at the screen, which showed a map of downtown with highlighted properties, blocks and blocks of prime real estate. "Harrison Capital Group," he whispered. "My company," I said calmly, "though you might know some of its subsidiaries: Wildvine Properties, Azure Development, Crown Point Investments." Sophia practically fell into her chair. Those are all the properties we've been handling contracts for. The ones owned by Mr. Chen's investment groups." "Not exactly," James corrected her. "Those properties belong to your sister. I've merely been helping her acquire them quietly over the years." "That's impossible," Dad sputtered. "Emma runs a cafe. She couldn't possibly." I pulled out my own copy of the contract. The cafe was just the beginning. When I bought this building 6 years ago, I saw an opportunity. Downtown was undervalued, fragmented. Nobody realized how much potential was being wasted. "While you were all busy mocking my little coffee shop," I continued, "I was meeting investors, analyzing property values, and slowly piecing together the largest private real estate portfolio in the city." Sophie grabbed the contract, her legal training kicking in as she scanned the documents. Her face went from skeptical to shock to something close to awe. This is worth hundreds of millions," she whispered. "You own half of downtown. More than half, actually, James added. Your sister has quite a talent for seeing value where others don't. Rather like buying a rundown cafe and turning it into the cornerstone of an empire. Dad sank into a chair, his face ashen. Why didn't you tell us? Would you have believed me? I asked quietly. You were all so convinced I was wasting my potential. It was easier to let you think that while I built something on my own terms. But you serve coffee, Sophie stammered. You wear an apron. I wear many things. I cut her off. Sometimes an apron, sometimes a business suit. The difference is I never needed everyone to see the suit to know my own worth. James pulled out his pen. Shall we make it official? I signed first, my signature bold and clear. James followed, then dated his signature with a flourish. Just like that, Harrison Capital Group became the largest consolidated private real estate holder in the city. Congratulations, James said, shaking my hand, though I must say, I'll miss our early morning investment meetings disguised as coffee runs. The cafe is still here, I smiled, though I might need to expand given how many lawyers might suddenly develop a taste for our lattes. Later that evening, after the shock had worn off and the family had retreated to process this new reality, I sat in my office above the cafe. The city lights twinkled beyond my window, my city, in many ways. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Can we talk over coffee tomorrow? I looked down at my cafe, still bustling with evening customers. The place where everyone thought I was just scraping by when in reality I was building an empire one cup at a time. Sure, I texted back. I know a great little place downtown. I hear the owner's doing pretty well for herself. Sometimes success doesn't look like what others expect. Sometimes it wears an apron and serves coffee while quietly buying up the building next door. And sometimes the best revenge isn't proving others wrong, it's proving yourself right. I closed my laptop and headed downstairs. Tomorrow, the newspapers would announce Harrison Capital Group's consolidation, and everyone would know the truth. But tonight, I had a cafe to run. After all, that's where the best deals happen. The moment I stood up at my own wedding reception, I saw my father's smug expression transform into shock. He'd spent years dismissing me as his disappointing daughter, but in 30 seconds, I was about to become his boss. I always dreamed my wedding day would be perfect. Instead, it became the day I finally showed my family who I really was. But to understand what happened at that reception, you need to know how I got there. My name is Emma Chen, and I grew up in the shadow of my father's expectations. Harrison Chen wasn't just a successful businessman, he was a titan of the industry who had built Chen Technologies from nothing into a multi-million-dollar empire. Every dinner conversation revolved around business strategies, market expansions, and the legacy he was building, a legacy I was apparently never good enough to be part of. Business is in our blood, he would say, looking proudly at my older brother Marcus. Well, most of our blood. That last part was always directed at me, along with a disapproving glance that made me feel about 2 inches tall. While Marcus followed perfectly in our father's footsteps, Wharton Business School, MBA, fast-tracked to executive positions, I chose a different path, computer engineering. My father's voice dripped with disdain when I announced my college major. Engineers work for people like us, Emma, they don't lead companies, but I saw something he didn't. While he was focused on old-school business models and traditional corporate structures, I recognized that the future belonged to those who could build it, line by code line. I graduated at the top of my class, but my father didn't attend the ceremony. He was too busy attending Marcus's MBA graduation that same weekend, an actual achievement, he called it. For 3 years after college, I worked at various tech startups, learning everything I could about both the technical and business sides of the industry. My father saw it as aimless drifting. When are you going to get a real job? He would ask at every family gathering. Marcus is already a vice president at Chen Technologies. What he didn't know was that I was building something that would change everything. It started in my tiny apartment's spare bedroom, a revolutionary cybersecurity system that could adapt and evolve in real time to counter new threats. While Marcus was attending board meetings and playing golf with executives, I was coding until 3 a.m. Fueled by coffee and determination. The first version of my security software caught the attention of a small venture capital firm. Their initial investment allowed me to hire 2 other engineers and rent a small office space. My mother, during one of her rare moments away from my father's influence, secretly helped me furnish it. I don't understand what you're building, she admitted as we assembled cheap desks from IKEA. Yeah, but I've never seen you so passionate about anything. The next 2 years were a blur of coding, pitching to investors, and slowly building my company, Secure Core Technologies. We won our first major contract with a mid-sized bank. then another, then a government agency quietly reached out about using our software. I kept my success quiet at family dinners. I still played the role of the underachieving daughter. When my father bragged about Marcus's latest accomplishment, I would smile and push food around my plate. When relatives asked about my little computer job, I gave vague answers about doing okay. Then I met David. He was different from anyone I'd ever known, a brilliant architect who saw the world in terms of possibilities rather than limitations. He didn't care about my family's money or status. In fact, the first time we met, he had no idea who the Chens were. "You seem surprised," I said when he finally found out about my family. "I am," he admitted. "You're nothing like what I'd expect from a wealthy family's daughter. You're real." We fell in love over late-night conversations about design principles, technological innovation, and our dreams for the future. When he proposed a year later, I didn't hesitate to say yes. My father, of course, had opinions about that too. "An architect?" he scoffed during dinner. "Couldn't you at least find someone in finance or business? Someone with real potential?" I gripped my fork tightly. "David is incredibly successful. His firm just won the contract for the new downtown development project. A glorified construction worker." My father waved dismissively. "At least Marcus's wife comes from a good family. Her father's company is listed on the NYSE. I looked at Marcus's wife, Catherine, who sat there with her perfect makeup and society smile, and felt a wave of pity. She was exactly what our father wanted, a proper corporate wife who attended charity galas and knew which wines to serve at dinner parties. The wedding planning became a battlefield. My father insisted on turning it into a networking event, inviting business associates and potential clients. My mother tried to mediate but ultimately deferred to him, as she always did. Even Marcus pulled me aside one day at the office. "Just let Dad have his way," he advised. "You know how he gets. Besides, it's not like you're paying for it." But I was. Every cent of my wedding was being paid for by Secure Core's profits, not that anyone knew that. What they also didn't know was that Secure Core had just gone public in a quiet but incredibly successful IPO. My ownership stake was worth $89 million, and that wasn't even the biggest secret I was keeping. 3 months before the wedding, I discovered something interesting during a routine security audit. Chin Technologies, my father's precious company, had serious vulnerabilities in their cybersecurity infrastructure, the kind of vulnerabilities that my software was designed to prevent. I could have warned them. Instead, I waited and watched through my networks as multiple small breaches occurred, nothing damaging. I made sure of that, but enough to send their stock price dropping and create panic among the board members. Then, through a series of shell companies, I began buying shares, lots of shares. The week before my wedding, I owned 22% of Chin Technologies. My father had no idea that his disappointing daughter was now one of his company's largest shareholders. The wedding day arrived, sunny and perfect. The ceremony was beautiful, exactly as David and I had planned, but I knew the real show would be at the reception, when my father would give his toast. I sat at the head table, holding David's hand under the white tablecloth, watching my father stand up with his champagne glass. He was wearing his favorite Tom Ford suit, the one he saved for closing major deals. The room fell silent as he began to speak. Little did he know that in the next few minutes, his entire world was about to turn upside down. My father stood at the microphone, champagne glass glinting under the reception hall's crystal chandeliers. 200 guests watched him, expecting the usual polished performance he gave at corporate events, but I could see something different in his eyes tonight, a coldness, an edge. "When Emma was born," he began, his voice carrying across the silent room, "I had such high hopes. The Chin family has a legacy of excellence in business. My father built his first company from nothing. I transformed it into an empire, and my son, Marcus," he gestured to my brother, who sat smugly at his table, "is carrying on that proud tradition." He paused, taking a sip of champagne. I felt David's hand tighten around mine. "But Emma chose a different path. Against all our family's advice, she went into," he wrinkled his nose slightly, "computer programming, a path for people who work for others, not leaders." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I saw David start to stand, but I squeezed his hand, holding him back. "Not yet. And now she's married an architect." My father's lips curved in what might have looked like a smile to others, but I recognized it as a sneer. "I suppose we should be grateful she's found someone who can at least design the buildings that real business leaders will work in." Catherine, Marcus's wife, let out a small laugh, quickly covered by her napkin. A few of my father's business associates chuckled politely. "The truth is," my father continued, his voice hardening, "some people just aren't meant for greatness, Emma will never amount to anything significant. She's been, and always will be, a disappointment to the Chen legacy. The room fell silent. Even those who had laughed looked uncomfortable now. My mother stared at her plate, hands twisted in her lap. Marcus couldn't quite hide his smirk. I stood up slowly, smoothing my wedding dress. Thank you for those heartfelt words, Dad. I have a few things to say too. I nodded to Michael, my chief technology officer, who had been posing as a photographer. He pressed a button on his laptop, and suddenly the large screens around the reception hall, the ones my father had insisted on having for his business presentation later, came to life. What is this? My father demanded, but his voice faltered as he saw what was displayed. On the screens were Secure Core's financial statements, stock prices, and, most importantly, my ownership stake, $89 million in my name alone. You see, Dad, while you were busy grooming Marcus to run your company, I was building my own, Secure Core Technologies. Perhaps you've heard of it? We're the ones who developed the adaptive cybersecurity system that's now used by most major banks and government agencies. My father's face had gone pale. Marcus was frantically typing on his phone, probably looking up Secure Core's public records. But that's not all, I continued, my voice steady. 3 months ago, we discovered some interesting vulnerabilities in Chin Technology's security infrastructure, the kind that could devastate a company if exploited by the wrong people. Another nod to Michael, and new information appeared on the screens: stock purchases, board meeting minutes, ownership percentages. I could have warned you, I said, walking around the table to stand directly in front of my father. Instead, I watched your stock price drop as minor breaches occurred, and then, through various shell companies, I started buying shares. Understanding dawned in my father's eyes. No, he whispered. Yes, I smiled. As of this morning, I own 22% of Chin Technologies, and tomorrow, when the market opens, I'll own even more, because tonight several board members will announce their retirement, board members who, coincidentally, have all agreed to sell their shares to me. Marcus stood up so quickly he knocked over his champagne. You can't do this, Dad. She can't do this. Actually, I can. And I have. I turned to address the shocked guests. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to announce that effective tomorrow, Secure Core Technologies will begin a merger with Chin Technologies. We'll be implementing our superior security systems, modernizing their outdated infrastructure, and bringing the company into the 21st century. My father finally found his voice. You planned this. You planned all of this. I learned from the best. Dad, isn't this what you always taught us? Identify weaknesses, seize opportunities, never show your hand until you're ready to win. The room erupted in chaos. Business reporters who had come to cover the society wedding of the year were suddenly scrambling to report on the biggest tech merger story instead. My father's face had turned an alarming shade of red, while Marcus looked like he might faint. I walked back to David, who was beaming with pride. He knew everything, of course, had known for months. Ready to face the cameras, Mr. Chen? I asked. He grinned. Lead the way, Mrs. Chen Pierce, CEO of Secure Core Technologies. The aftermath was everything I expected and more. The merger made headlines across every business publication. Chin Technology stock soared once investors learned of Secure Core's involvement. Marcus was quietly moved to a non-executive position. And my father? Well, my father had to adapt to a new reality. His first board meeting under my leadership was particularly memorable. This is the security upgrade proposal, I said, sliding documents across the table to him. I'll need your signature by the end of the day. He stared at me for a long moment, then picked up his pen. You really did it, he said quietly. You built something remarkable. Yes, I replied. I did, without your help, without your approval, and without following your path. And that's what really bothers you, isn't it? He signed the papers without responding. As he stood to leave, he paused at the door. Your mother wants you to come to dinner on Sunday. I smiled. I'll be there. And Dad? This time, I'll give the toast. 1 year later, Chin Secure Core Technologies was valued at over $3 billion. My father still sits on the board, though now he listens more than he speaks. Marcus found his own path, starting a small consulting firm. Turns out he's better at advising businesses than running them. And my mother? She finally started speaking up at family dinners. David and I bought a penthouse overlooking the city, but we kept my old apartment where I built Secure Core's first prototype. Sometimes I go there to work late at night, remembering those early days when everyone thought I was wasting my time. The media loves to call it a revenge story, how the underestimated daughter took over her father's company, but it's really about something else. It's about building something on your own terms. About proving that success doesn't have to follow someone else's blueprint. Last week, my father actually asked for my advice about a new tech investment. You see things differently, he admitted. You see the future. I looked out at the city skyline from my office, the same office that used to be his. No, Dad, I said, I don't just see the future, I build it. And that's worth more than any inheritance he could have given.